From the new normal to the economy to entertainment news. Now, these were some of the issues here that made international headlines over the past week. So how is the foreign media explaining the preference by some for face masks despite the ease requirements? And what has been the international coverage regarding Korea's worst trade deficit in 2022? Meanwhile, is coverage of Hallyu-related news expanding beyond borders? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we take a look at stories here in this part of the world that made international headlines over the past week. For more, I have Kwon Soa here in the studio with me. Soa, welcome back.
Hello, Sunny.
I also have Steven Borowiec with us. Steven, it's good to have you back.
Happy to be here.
Right, so let's begin with last week's coverage by the New York Times in line with Korea's easing of indoor mask requirements. Now, the paper touched upon reasons behind people's decision to wear their face masks despite the eased indoor mandate. Tell us a bit more.
Right, Sunny, we talked about the ease in indoor mask wearings here in Korea last week and also touched upon some of the reasons for why experts believe that we won't see a surge in COVID-19 infections right after we lift these rules. So it's not going to be because of the easing of the rules, if we do see some increases, because many Koreans will actually choose to continue to wear them. However, the phenomenon seems to be a rather unique one in East Asia, and that's also what the New York Times has been observing. So what seem to be the reasons for why people in South Korea, for instance, keep wearing their masks? And what's highlighted here in the article is that, for instance, old habits are hard to change because countries in East Asia were not only faster than others in implementing mask mandates or recommendations, but also are the latest in lifting these, meaning it's become a habit for a long time. Some had them on in public spaces for 3 years. And on top of that, this habit of wearing face masks actually dates back to pre-pandemic times because of fine dust and also the outbreaks of SARS and MERS. And putting on masks also during the pandemic naturally led to other habits, including not wearing makeup and not having to smile, so show your expressions to others. And maybe some even felt themselves speaking evilly behind their masks about others while they're having them on. So despite the obvious inconveniences that come with wearing masks, such as discomfort in breathing and also hurting ears, difficulties in communication or fogging glasses, the habit actually has created some favorable conveniences in people's daily lives. The New York Times cited a cultural studies scholar in Seoul who said people have gotten comfortable with concealing their face and therefore feel a certain amount of discomfort about revealing their bare faces now. In Japan, there's also the expression kao pantsu that translates into face pants. That means if you walk out your home without your masks on, it would feel as embarrassing as forgetting to wear your underwear. And some other reasons that have been named were that people in East Asia have a lot of respect for others or the well-being of others in their surrounding that might be vulnerable, and that's also why some continue to wear their masks. And also on top of that, health officials are actually recommending that you should still wear your face masks indoors, and there are also some places where they're calling on them to keep wearing them, such as it's still mandatory at hospitals or public transportation. So there's quite a number of reasons for why Koreans and other people in this region are still continuing to wear their mask.
You're right. I do find myself wearing the face mask when I'm inside an elevator, though, confined spaces. Like
Same
yourself,
with me,
right?
yeah.
I think we talked about that last week as well. Stephen, among the reasons given by the New York Times, what appears to ring true for you, based, of course, on your experience here in Korea?
Well, I think that's a good summary. I think there's a lot to be said of a lot of people in kind of really big, densely crowded cities like Seoul or Tokyo wanting to kind of blend into the crowd. And it's easier to do that if you're wearing a mask. It's easier to, you can save time. I'm fortunate in that, unlike my fellow panelists, I have not had the daily annoyance of having to do makeup. And
really?
I mean, I've chosen not to. I guess I could if I really wanted to, but that's not normally been a part of my routine. But I can see why somebody would want to forego that if possible. Also, I think there's some things that suit the psychology in this part of the world. There's this Korean idea of minpae, of like not wanting to cause inconvenience to the people who are not wanting to behave in a selfish way that is detrimental to the people that are around you and wanting to kind of smoothly fit in and not be disruptive. I think there's a lot to that. I think it's also just if you look at the daily figures that are still coming out, there's still, I don't know, what is something in the like 10 or 20,000 range. I mean, this illness is still out there. I mean, unfortunately, we're at a point where if you get COVID now, especially if you're vaccinated, you probably won't be that sick for that long. But if it comes down to a quite simple measure like just wearing a face mask, and we can debate the efficacy of masks, we don't really know if they are a strong preventative measure or not. But I think a lot of Koreans see it as just kind of a simple thing that they can do to protect their own health and maybe protect the health of the people around them. For people who have to go out to work every day, they could worry that if they come home that their children or their relatives might be exposed to COVID. I've always felt, and this is just my theory, I can't really substantiate this anyway, but it kind of makes sense in the psychology and the geography of Korea, in that this is a country that has been throughout its history invaded by outsiders. And there's this idea that it makes sense to erect barriers to the outside world. So if there's something out there that you perceive as a threat, it makes sense to kind of buttress your own defenses and to try to protect yourself from something that you could perceive as potentially being harmful coming up from outside. Again, that's just my theory, but I think I expect to continue to see masks on the street for the foreseeable future, especially with us, unfortunately, going into the find us time of year.
I know, right. Moving forward, so Korea's record trade deficit also made headlines last week. How severe is this situation?
Right, a number of media outlets abroad have mentioned this, as Bloomberg, AP, and CNBC, with titling them "South Korea posts record trade deficit and further hit to economy." That's by Bloomberg, and AP titling it "South Korea logs record trade deficit as tech demand falls." And CNBC said South Korea posts the worst trade deficit in its history. So let's get into the details of those figures. The country logged a trade deficit of $47.5 billion for year 2022, with foreign media citing data from South Korea's Trade Ministry and Customs Agency. And that's the worst trade deficit since data was compiled in 1956. It's also the first time since 2008 that the country has had a trade deficit, and the shortfall is more than twice as large as the previous record deficit of $20.6 billion that was registered in 1996. Korea also recorded its biggest monthly trade deficit ever at $12.7 billion. Exports dropped $46.3 billion in January, or 16.6% from the month before, and imports declined $59 billion, or 2.6% on month. And a Reuters poll by experts expected exports to fall 11.3% and imports 3.6%. That means in terms of outbound shipments, that's a much bigger fall than forecasts, and for inbound shipments, it's a smaller decline, thus a deficit worse than expected. This is attributed to a weakening demand in chip exports and other high-tech goods, while costs for importing oil and gas hiked. South Korea's Minister of Economy and Finance, Chu Kyung-ho, mentioned that seasonal causes, such as an increase, as I mentioned before, in energy imports during the winter season played a big role, and also other factors such as a decline in semiconductor export prices, as well as disruptions in Chinese economic activities, and that due to COVID-19 has further deteriorated the trade balance. And CNBC noted the plunge in global smartphone shipments by 18% in the fourth quarter in 2022 on the back of dropping demand, and also mentioned chipmaker Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix all having losses in the final quarters of last year as well.
Right, they called it an earnings shock, I believe. Steven, broadly speaking, how does Korea's trade performance compare to that of its global counterparts? Is this a universal trend?
I think it's both specific and universal, in the sense that there are these kind of broader headwinds are being seen around the world, but I do think that there are some aspects of the Korean experience that are unique, in that, as Minister Chu pointed out, this is a country that has to import a lot of its energy. It's a non-petroleum producing country. So when there are spikes in global energy prices that can lead to a disruption in the balance of payments, especially when you consider that this is a manufacturing powerhouse that it needs to import energy, not just for household or basic needs, but to power a quite advanced industrial infrastructure. And over the past few years, Korea has really made a lot of its economic growth has come from these exports of these very particular items that with the pandemic and with some broader economic trends were in really high demand. And the demand for things like semiconductors and certain kinds of batteries are kind of naturally, after a peak, they're kind of naturally coming back to a sort of mean level. And that's to be expected. I think despite these very big numbers, despite that, as Soa pointed out, these are kind of record-setting numbers, I think they won't continue like that. I think we'll see, as we alluded to, there will be a recovery of demand from China, a recovery of demand from some other major economies. These things go up and down, and I don't see any reason as to get too fretful about what this means for the Korean economy. I think I attended a foreign media briefing with Minister Chu a few weeks ago, and he and some of his colleagues from the ministries laid out a pretty comprehensive plan of how the government is plotting its economic vision going forward. I think they're quite aware of the risk of a crisis, but they are investing a lot in innovation, and they're investing a lot in streamlining things and having the economy perform more efficiently and taking advantage of some of the strengths that the Korean business and government landscape has, and they seem pretty determined to turn things around, and I see no reason for too much pessimism at this point.
Right, good to know, good to know. So on a light note then, Korean actor Song Joong-ki, I suppose, is a married man now, as covered by CNN.
Right, not long after rumors of South Korean actor Song Joong-ki being in a relationship were confirmed in December last year, just last week Song made a big announcement on his official fan page saying he has married British actress Katie Louise Saunders, and the two are even expecting a child. And this was on the day the two registered their marriage, as Song told his fans. They had not had a marriage celebration yet. Now, Song said, quote, "I vowed to do life together with Katie Louise Saunders, who has been spending precious time with me by supporting and caring for me." He described her as an admirable, wise, and wonderful person with a kind heart who has been living her life passionately. Thanks to her, he said, "I am becoming a better person." The 37-year-old actor said that he and Saunders had dreamed of making a happy family and that thankfully a precious life has come to them. CNN in its report said it confirmed the news with Song's agency High Zeum Studio. Now Song, who debuted in 2008 with A Frozen Flower or Sanghwajom in Korean, is well known for his dramas Seonggyungwan Scandal and Descendants of the Sun, in which he starred alongside fellow actress Song Hye-kyo, to whom he got married to in 2016, and they were very famously known as the Song-Song couple, but they divorced in 2019. CNN mentioned they were actually perceived as Asia's answer to American A-list pairings like Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. But congratulations to Song for his future ahead.
Right, and a new family right there.
Yeah.
Stephen, do you believe there's been a growing coverage of perhaps Hallyu-related news in recent times? And if that is the case, how do you explain this trend?
First of all, let me just express congratulations to Song and say that I'm thrilled at the prospect of more half-Korean babies out there. They're the cutest. In terms of if there's been a recent uptick, it depends on what you mean by recent. I think maybe things now are... There's maybe not quite as much coverage as there was a couple of years ago when there was Parasite and when BTS were a little more active. Maybe there's a slight kind of downturn now, but I don't think that's indicative of an overall decline in interest. I think we're probably at a stage with Korean popular culture where the demand is, I think, pretty sturdy. It's no longer reliant on a particular thing like a Gangnam Style or a girls' generation performing on a U.S. late night show. I think the global fan base is a lot bigger and a lot more dedicated, and demand for these things and attention on these things can kind of withstand any kind of cyclical ups and downs. I mean, we just saw the Grammys were last night, and as far as I know, there were no Korean winners there. BTS didn't win anything, and I was kind of hoping with I'm not that big of a BTS fan, but I am a fan of film director Park Chan-wook. I was hoping that decision to leave his latest work was going to get a little more hardware on the international circuit. That didn't work out, but I mean, maybe now is a good time for policymakers in the entertainment establishment to have a think about, you know, what Korea's next big hit might be. I hope that, and I'm confident that the people who are in charge of these things are not just banking on the more established entertainers, the Park Chan-wooks and the BTSs of the world. They're, you know, investing in creating another generation, new and upcoming artists who can share stories about how Korea is evolving. You know, Korea is not the same country as it was when Park Chan-wook started making movies, or even when BTS debuted. There's new things happening here. There's new young people who have different takes on things. You know, as we've discussed, young people today have a much different experience of the world than we did because of all the technology and all the ways that the world is changing. And I'm sure that there will be new and compelling things that will drive a very sustained interest in this country's popular culture.
Right, there is much more to share, of course. And staying with entertainment-related headlines, Soa, the New York Times also, it featured a piece on Korea's efforts to make Metaverse entertaining. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Right, so that might be what Steven just mentioned about new and compelling things in the entertainment world in Korea, because I mean, the metaverse hasn't really yet infiltrated into our daily lives. I don't know, how do you feel about it? For me, myself, I don't really feel like I'm surrounded by anything metaverse-like, right? But it's being associated with entertainment a lot, and that's where the industry seems to have potential in, as Korea is experiencing a lot with entertaining people using the metaverse. And that's what the New York Times is highlighting in its piece titled, "Will the Metaverse Be Entertaining? Ask South Korea." And one of the answers South Korea appears to have right now is merging K-pop with the metaverse world. An example is Mave, a new girl group comprised of 4 virtual members. It was jointly created by Korea's Kakao Entertainment and Metaverse Entertainment, an affiliate of a game company Netmarble, in a bid to elevate Korea's global K-pop market to a new level, as well as see growth in metaverse users. And other projects include an audition show called Girls Reverse, where real girl group members compete against each other in this metaverse to form a new virtual girl group. According to a media and communication professor cited by the New York Times, while ambitions to venture into the metaverse exist here and there, in order to be successful, it needs good content. And in Korea, that content, he says, is K-pop. So no wonder that it's the Korean entertainment sector that's delving into all kinds of possibilities with a certain amount of confidence. The article with that refers to South Korea as, quote, the world's testing ground for all things technological. And an analyst cited in the article says that South Korea is often looked at like a test bed for what the future will hold in terms of trends, adding that South Korea is the country most likely to serve as a springboard for any trend that is going to move into the US. And have you guys actually heard of this group Mave or the audition program? Or
I have a teenage daughter, so I'm actually aware of that group.
Oh, you are? Because I was not really that interested in virtual girl groups or boy groups, because I mean, Korea has enough of them. But I was actually switching through some channels, and then I saw the debut of Mave when they first went on one of those entertainment, those singing programs. And I found it actually pretty interesting and amazing.
It's quite impressive.
It was, yes. So
have you seen them actually, Steven?
No, but my question is, if it's real performers who are involved in this, like if I don't understand it correctly, it's like real performers who audition and then they form a virtual.
No, they're actually virtual.
Yes,
right?
that's the audition program.
Okay.
They are actually real girl group members who sing, and the audience just doesn't know who they are. But then in the case of this new girl group, they are all really virtual, and we don't know about the actual voices behind them.
Okay. And so, is that all scripted, or like to what extent can these performers like make their own choices? Like, are they
in the actual show, right?
Yeah.
Oh, in the show, to be honest, I haven't watched the show yet, but I just saw the stage of this group, this new girl group.
Okay.
Completely forgiven. Now, Mina, so the weather here in East Asia, it's also been a topic of concern among foreign media, ranging from those in the US and those over in the UK as well. Could you tell us a bit more?
Right. I'll make this one a little brief because the actual the worst is over because it was during the Lunar New Year holidays. It started in the Lunar New Year holidays, and then afterwards we saw really temperatures plunge a lot here in South Korea as well as in surrounding regions. But what media have been headlining was that in Japan, in South Korea as well as North Korea, deadly cold snap swept across, and they also mentioned how extreme weather killed at least one person in Japan. And it's not only in this region, but also in Afghanistan, record lows were have killed at least 124 people. So yes, it was frigid temperatures that have not only led to these casualties, but also a lot of flight disruptions, especially in Korea for people who wanted to fly to Jeju Island, especially during the lunar holidays. Many of them could not return back on the day they were scheduled to return. So yes, this have been making headlines in the past
lot of chaos.
Past 1 or 2 weeks.
Right. And Steven, quite a number of people, of course, say that climate change is to blame for extreme weather in this part of the world as well. And thus efforts continue to protect Mother Nature here. And that includes Korea's restrictions on single-use items. How have these particular restrictions impacted your life here?
Well, I've always been a kind of plastic conscious person. Or even for a long time, I always, many years ago, I was already carrying like cloth bags when I went to buy groceries. I just, a very long time ago, I had this realization of like, we're always taking these plastic items, but plastic doesn't biodegrade. Like plastic just, I know we recycle, but like there's real questions as to just how effective that is. And I thought, well, doesn't it make sense to just kind of reduce use of plastic wherever possible? So, if for years, if I was getting takeout coffee, I would always tell them to omit the lid. I don't need the lid, I'll just drink it out of the cardboard cup. All of this stuff makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've always noticed, I've traveled to the Philippines a bunch of times, and if you go to any kind of a store there, they will refuse to give you a plastic bag because of the problems that plastic bags can cause with flooding there. So I do think humankind has been kind of gorging on plastic for too long already, and I really commend the government's efforts to crack down on this even more, especially in a country with such a culture of takeout coffee as there is in Korea. I mean, if you walk around any busy office area of Seoul around lunchtime, you'll see just countless people carrying plastic cups. I hope more and more of them will get in the habit of just bringing along their own reusable cup. And I think I got a news briefing from the Ministry of Environment a while ago that they're going to introduce this plan where you can kind of collect points if you, I might be getting the details wrong, but you can, there's some kind of incentive to participate in coffee shops. If you bring your own disposable cup, you can get some kind of, not disposable, reusable cup is what I meant to say.
Right.
So more of this, please, is my my bottom line on that.
Right, I support you right there. Me too, I hope the same as well. So let's end on a tasty tone today. A monthly US magazine on dining and whining recently applauded Capital Seoul's bakery scene, saying that it took it to the next level. Very brief response.
Yes, that's the Food and Wine magazine that featured Seoul's bakery scene from the past until today. And for foreigners, it might be quite unusual if you speak about bread in Korea. But actually, Korea's bakery stores already expanded into the world, even into Paris, for instance, which would be the more conventional place you would think of if you speak about bakery or confectionery. But the magazine introduces Seoul's oldest bakery, Taegukdang Bakery, which is famous for bean-filled buns and ice cream-filled monakas. So we've got tradition when it comes to these bakeries. But today, we have trendy modern-day bakeries in places like Seocheon in Seoul. And what's popular about those is really experimental pastries, but also the design of them and also the architecture of those bakeries or coffee shops, with one of them being designed like a traditional hanok, for instance. And last but not least, one particular thing that's trending these days, and I think Sunny, you are a fan of this too, is bagels. And Koreans are also putting their own touch into these bagels, for which people are standing even lines for hours to get one of those.
Right, bagels.
Yeah.
All right, so as always, thank you very much for that. And Steven, as always, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time on Wednesday.